Good morning and good afternoon for our colleagues in Asia and the Pacific. Good evening, good night, perhaps, for our friends who call in from the Americas. Um, Very glad that you are here, and I welcome you to the first session at the Amsterdam International Water Week on the first session on clean water and ecosystem restoration. The Amsterdam International Water Week wants to be an enabler and accelerator for meeting the SDGs, and water indeed is pivotal because it runs across all these SDGs. SDG 2 on uh, the objective to achieve zero hunger, um, objective 6 obviously on clean water, objective 9 on industry and infrastructure, think jobs, objective number 11, it's about sustainable cities and communities. And 13, obviously, is then on climate, which means resilience, adaptation. So water is very much present in all of these agendas. In our session, we have three eminent speakers, and some of them will approach the subject from a more conceptual or more research perspective, and others will discuss application and implementation. And I think that's a rightful mix because we want to learn from research and from practice. My name is Guy Allards. I'm the professor for water management at the IHE International Institute for Water Education in Delft, also in the Netherlands. And I would like now to shift in our session on clean water and ecosystem restoration to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Mr. Ranjan Mishra, who is the Director General at the Department for Water Resources, River Development and Ganga Rejuvenation of the Government of India. And he's also the chairman of the Clean Ganga National Program, National Mission. And so he will give a speech on making the Ganga Basin cities risk and climate resilient. So that's quite a huge challenge, a very, very interesting topic. And indeed, the Clean Ganga program is one of the largest undertakings on a coherent program for a very large river basin currently going on in the world. So, Mr. Rajiv Mishra, may I give you the floor?
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity, and I fully echo your thought that this is a huge basin, and then the challenges are also really very momentous. I mean, there are all kinds of issues when you look at the basin of the size of Ganga and the complexity of Ganga, and those complexities are further enhanced with the impact of climate change. Can I see the next slide, please? So the thought is basically I have picked it up about, and this is the time all of the whole globe is talking about climate change and discussing about carbon emissions and what should be our targets. While we discuss all these at the level of countries and global level and negotiate, perhaps what I'm going to talk in next few minutes is more localized. Basin, of course, is not localized. Basin is quite large. But again, if you look at cities within the basin, perhaps, and then each city, what they have to do and how they have to approach this problem, perhaps we have to look at a more local context. Next, please. When we look at climate resilience and then why cities are so important, cities are hot spots, we all know. On one hand, and on the other hand, we all know that globe is becoming more and more urbanized. I think the globe is already going to become more than 70% by 2050 urban. when we look at India, at present, we are not at the 50% level, but the urban characteristics are really growing up in something which is still considered as non-urban. But the urban characteristics is growing, and the size of population, if you look at the absolute scale, it's really huge. So we are also going to cross. Typically, we have been talking about India as a rural country or agricultural based country, but perhaps that thing is changing, and now we are almost at the level of 35% urban population, and next 10-15 years we are also going to become more urban in the country. So I think that's something which we have to also look at. So when such a large population in the globe is urban, and then cities are also contributor to the economy of the country, cities are also hot spots. Why primarily they are hot spots? The way we construct our city, the way we design our city. So I think perhaps there is need for all of us to improve capacities of cities, so that we can be more resilient towards climate. There are also issues of policies. What kind of policies we have, what kind of regulations we have, and then how we can really make them more aligned towards ecological goal. And again, cities, as you very rightly mentioned, several SDGs, the water actually is important in several SDGs. And when you look at 11, the sustainable cities, sustainable settlements, perhaps equity becomes very important. And similarly, in SDG 6 also, the equity, access to affordable water, sanitation, all these things become very important. And another challenge is stakeholder engagement. How we can really make people realize about their role, and then how they can contribute towards these kind of larger issues. Next one, please. So in this situation, primarily we have to look at different kinds of insecurities, and then again, just trying to very quickly give you the river basins. Several river basins are experiencing the impact of climate change. Ganga is no exception also in that. And if you look at, we, on the one hand, we have got large number of urban flooding incidents. The rainfall is taking place. Maybe the overall annual rainfall might not have changed, but it happens in a very, very short duration of time. Very huge rainfall comes. So that's one. And on another hand, we also have a situation where wetlands and water bodies are also drying up. So I think we have to look at these two dichotomies and then come up with some sort of strategy about that. A little more on the Indian context, and also a little bit more on the Ganga Basin context. See, we have a huge population, 18% of the global population, but our access to global freshwater resources is limited to 4%. So water management becomes very, very important for us. And if you look at, and why Ganga Basin? Ganga Basin is very important because 43% of the large population of India is in this basin. 11 states are there in this basin. We have a huge water resources of the country in this basin. This is also highly agriculture oriented, so it's very important for the food security as well as water security for the country. And what we call Amrut cities, I will just explain. I mean, we have defined the cities with more than 100,000 population in the country as we say class 1 city. So out of these 500 such cities, the larger cities of 100,000 plus population, 261 are in Ganga Basin. Similarly, we also have 100 smart city. There is a smart city program going on. Again, almost 1/3 of them are in Ganga Basin. So the cities in the Ganga Basin become very important for not only for rejuvenating this basin, but also creating a kind of program, creating a kind of approach which can be very useful for other places also. And what we have been trying to do is, we have been trying to create a concept of river cities, and how we can actually work on the river cities. And this Namami Gange, what I have written, it's a name given to the conservation program. What you said, Clean Ganga program, it's more than cleaning. It's basically, it's a huge river basin, and it's more about rejuvenation. So pollution abatement is the cleaning part is very much there, more focal thing, but it's also about improving its ecology, improving flow, connecting people with the river, and creating the right kind of research and knowledge base where you can take scientific decisions. So I think that is what is meant encompassing into this Namami Gange program. And then the typical meaning of this term Namami Gange is basically it's giving a kind of salutation to the river. So basically we respect you, Mother Ganga. So that's the meaning of this particular name which has been given to the program. Next please.
Yes.
So while this is going on, let's look at the challenges between cities and river, and then I will follow it up with the last slide of my presentation and discuss this.
Next.
Yeah. So uh, I just tried to explain the interaction between river and city, and then we all know how different sources of pollution create a problem for the river health, and how different other issues are also there. So what we have tried to develop in this program, a kind of 10-point agenda where we work on different things through either policy or through some specific projects. So urban river management plan is primarily that. So I think when we say river, one thing let me also say that apart from river, we also include in that area the wetlands, the other kinds of smaller river, and also floodplain. It becomes very important. I think there's a lot to learn from the experience of Netherlands about room for the river program. Lot of problem is happening because we are actually encroaching the floodplain or constructing the floodplain or concretizing the floodplain. So the urban river management plan is basically looking at the entire thing and then doing it. Similarly, if we look at the water sensitive urban design and planning, we are working on some specific projects and also capacity building of the cities in this. Recently, we did one study where the open area, the parks, if we utilize even less than 5% of their area with proper design, we were able to restore. We were able to store a very huge quantity of water during rain. So I think primarily looking at the water cycle and trying to look at the river escape, the built environment, as well as the landscape, trying to align with that. So again, we are working on that. We have also tried to learn and create a kind of guideline paradigm for river sensitive master planning. We're trying to do that in Delhi. Master plan is under upgradation, and we are trying to work with different cities, trying to improve in their master plan the way they treat rivers, they treat the water bodies in that area.
One more minute,
Yeah,
Mr.
just
Mishra. Thank you.
I will conclude. So I think, as we rightly see, for mitigating climate change, the water and vegetation, these two things will be very important to reduce the heating effect in the city. So that's why afforestation and biodiversity is very important to understand urban biodiversity and look at the riparian as well as aquatic biodiversity. Wetlands we have already discussed quite a lot. About pollution abatement, what we are trying to do is trying to look at operation and maintenance of the plants. Normally, a lot of construction takes place, but performance is not ensured. So we have come up with some sort of PPP model, and then we have been trying to look at long-term O&M, and ultimately stakeholders. I will just come to the last point, River City Alliance. We all know that we have to build up partnerships, and we are trying to develop a framework where different river cities will have a chance to meet each other virtually or directly, share their good practices, best practices, and move in this direction. We need to build up capacity at the city level to mitigate climate change, to improve climate resilience. I think global discussions are good, important, but to create capacity at the city level to really understand and change their way of thinking, the way they execute projects, the way they plan their city, the way master plans are implemented, becomes very important. So primarily in Namami Gange, as far as the city side is concerned, we are trying to develop a kind of holistic framework and also bring these things into picture. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mishra, for a very interesting presentation. Indeed, you're facing quite some challenges there. I do not see too many questions popping up already, and I suppose that has to do with the fact that we are still early in the program, so people have to warm up, I suppose. And at the same time, also they may also be a little bit overwhelmed by the size, the scale of the challenges in the Ganga Basin. So I would like to encourage our attendees to indeed send in questions. They should not refrain from them, but awaiting any coming in, I would like to submit one to you, and it is that India is a huge country. It is also a federal country, so you in the central government, in the Ministry of Water Resources, you have to deal with state governments, several states, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, that are located in the Ganga Basin, and also, of course, the municipal governments. And so you have a multitude of governments to deal with. And so I wonder how you can keep together, how we can bring all these governments in the same, with the same mission, the same direction. So what kind of instruments do you have, and notably what kind of incentives, financial incentives, do you have to achieve these goals?
Excellent issue to be raised, and I agree it's a major challenge, and that's why we have looked at the design of the program in such a way. Two things: one, you rightly mentioned about the finances, and second is the institutional support. So when we have designed, see, this National Mission for Clean Ganga has been also notified as an authority under Environmental Protection Act. That's a central act, but Environmental Protection Act is legally valid for inter-basin or interstate rivers. So Ganga very much qualifies into that. So that gives us some sort of institutional and the legal framework to work along with all the states and also give directions to them. That's one. Then we also have created an institutional support, like we have got a National Ganga Council chaired by the Prime Minister. So at the top level, where all the ministers, the key central ministers and also chief ministers are member. So I think some sort of consensus at the highest political level takes place. Then we have got the institutional structure at the NMCG level. Then there is also at the state level, and we have brought it down to the district level, because in a district you will have urban area and rural area. So I think that district Ganga committee, so you have district Ganga committee, you have a national Ganga committee. So that whole chain of institutions have been created. Finances are very important. So we also, like lots of reforms which we are doing about PPP being brought into the STPs and all that. Namami Ganga is a central sector scheme. So any project which we agree to fund, we fund it 100%. So I think there is a huge incentive to listen to some of these changes if they want to get money from us. But again, what we give is not going to be enough. They have to bring their own money also. But actually to catalyze this action, I think this has been very effective. So we have been able to bring hybrid annuity mode of PPP to improve performance. And now outside Ganga Basin also, several states are finding a lot of value in that. And then they are adopting it. In Hyderabad recently, a huge project has been taken up under hybrid annuity. So I think similarly about the River City program. When we have this River City Alliance, many of the cities outside Ganga Basin are also seeing some value because they can get a lot of technical support. So they are joining. So it has to be a very tightrope walking. I know it's not a very easy thing, especially about the flow. We have also notified environmental flow, the minimum flow in the river for the first time in India that we could do, because we have got that mandate under Environmental Protection Act. So that mandate is given to us in NMCG as an authority. So we have done that. But it took years together to convince people. Now we are working on another river, Yamuna, which is part of the basin. And then trying to negotiate with the states about that. As you know, the agriculture is the largest abstractor of the water. So I think unless you convince them and you also have demand side management of water, it's not possible to simply say this is the minimum flow you must ensure. What happens to the cultivation? So I think there's a lot of give and take, and a stakeholder engagement in basin management is a must. And then we have been trying to develop a kind of framework. To some extent we have succeeded, and the movement is in the positive direction.
If I may ask a second question in the same vein, what would you consider the measure, the index of success of the program? How would you measure that in physical or in financial terms?
Physical terms, I think one thing is about quality of water. So I think as you move along, if you have been able to improve the quality of water, that's an obvious program of measures. And I can tell you now, entire length of Ganga, 2,500 kilometers, we have been able to meet the minimum criteria for dissolved oxygen. Biological oxygen demand also has been decreasing. So there is an improvement at a large number of places. So I think water quality measures we have been able to, the moment we keep on completing the projects, there is a relationship and quality is improving. Second thing which I will also say, which is about people involvement. Because many of the programs earlier, they were more like a kind of engineering or construction program. Here in this program, we have tried to reach out to the community. So now there are lots of community cadres, people go to the river. Today also we have started a celebration of river Ganga Utsav we call. So I think several activities, whether by way of quizzes, by way of different kinds of continuous activity, trying to catch the younger people and trying to change their mindset, the behavioral patterns. So I think we have been making a lot of success in that. And third thing I will tell you about the water quantity, the flow, because unless you improve ecology and flow, in the long run, only quality will not be able to help us. And I can see we have some improvement in the biodiversity. The Gangetic dolphin, that's our national aquatic animal, and there are more sightings of Gangetic dolphin in last few years. I mean, things are improving, but I am not saying that we have achieved complete success, but what is there, we are moving in the right direction. That kind of activity, that kind of outcome is showing us, but we have a long way to go, and we have to keep this momentum building up further and further.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mishra. Thank you very much. Very enlightening discussion. And I would like now to shift to our second speaker, Ms. Praveena Sridhar from the Isha Foundation, also from India. Not from the north, as in the case of Ganga, but more from the south, on the large Cauvery River. A very different, not very different, maybe a different starting point for river rejuvenation. Mrs. Sridhar, you are from the Isha Foundation, working on the project Green Hands, if I understand it well. Perhaps before you start, you can also say one line about the importance of the Cauvery River, and you have 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Namaste. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone across the world. Cauvery is the lifeline of southern India, two major states of southern India. And it's a privilege to follow somebody who's talking about Ganga, Rajiv Ranjan sir. It's like, in a way, what he spoke and what I spoke will actually cover the gamut of things that any river rejuvenation project has to look at when it comes to tropical rivers. While sir was looking at the cities and the urban aspect of it, my focus, the presentation's focus, will be about the rural usage and how to rejuvenate river by altering the rural land use pattern. Yeah. So Cauvery is the lifeline of two states of southern India. The upper state is Karnataka, upper river basin state, and the lower river basin state is Tamil Nadu. Can you go to the next slide, please? We intend for this to be a journey of rejuvenation for most of the tropical rivers across the globe, and especially through the work, especially the work that is required on agriculture lands alone. Yeah. Little bit of a background as to why this case, Cauvery Calling, stands as a case study for the tropical, rivers. You take Nile, you take Congo, or the beautiful Amazon River. The rate at which deforestation is happening, the rate at which these rivers are drying up, it doesn't give enough, what must I say, life for these rivers. Maybe 100 years, sometimes 20 years, sometimes 25 years is the way the predictions are happening, the way the land use has been moving, right? And especially, like sir was talking about Ganga, Ganga has had around 70% of the deforestation of all the forests which were feeding into her, and Cauvery has had far more than whatever, around 70% of rivers that are feeding into the trees that are feeding into the river. So, and India as a country, we have been able to make access to drinking water available to majority of the population, and to a good extent sanitation also. But piped water is still something that we are pursuing very aggressively. And this requires that for any piped water supply to happen, local water resources are available which can be harvested, right? So these are the kind of challenges any tropical river across the world is facing. The fundamental issue that we are trying to address is the dwindling quantity of water that is flowing through these rivers. Next slide, please. So what is the problem that we are trying to address, and how are we trying to address, right? There are many ways to bring a river back to life. Like sir was talking about having treatment plants in place. You have, ecological works done on all the protected forest areas, wetlands, and the other sort. But our focus as Cauvery Calling from Isha Foundation is to work with the millions of farmers who are using the water of the river and who are also the custodians of the river, right? Around 4.5 million people are living off the Cauvery River. This basin is supposed to be one of the most fertile, prosperous basins on which farmers could do 2 or 3 crops a year. Now, even in the most fertile part of the lands of the basin, farmers many times are able to only 1 crop a year, right? So we are asking, or we are requesting of the farmers that they make one change. And this one change is to have a portion of their land on which they are doing the farming to be brought under tree. We are not asking for the whole land. Let's say a farmer has an acre or 2 acres of land. We are asking him, can you move 10 or 20% of your land under tree cover, right? And why trees? Trees have been the biggest, what must I say, rainwater harvesters of the world, right? They have the technology, they have the most sophisticated technology through which they can harvest rains, they can invoke rain. Just having enough forest in local areas can actually precipitate the clouds, right? So trees can precipitate clouds, they can harvest the rain that falls on the land into the soil and therefore into the groundwater, and this groundwater eventually forms the base flows of the rivers and the other local surface water bodies. That's what the image is showing here, right? And trees become very, very important, especially in tropical countries with monsoon. We as a nation get rains during 3 to 4 months of a year. We don't have rains spread across the year. Either we harvest the 4 months or we go dry after that, right? Excuse me. Also, trees are very important for the quality of soil. Like as I told, we want to work with farmers. Why would a farmer plant a tree, right? If you look at the organic soil content in the soil, especially in India, it's come down drastically from the minimum 3% of organic content, which is subscribed by Food and Agriculture Organization. This is predominantly because of monoculturing not being able to bring back organic into the soil, right? So bringing back trees, first of all, is good for the rivers, and second of all, our stakeholders of whom we ask change. It's also good for them in terms of improving soil quality and therefore improving the yields. Right? Next slide, please. So what's the mandate of Cauvery Calling? So we want around 2.42 billion trees be planted in the agriculture lands of the farmers who live in this entire river basin. And these amount to be around 4.2 million farmers, right? And we have set ourselves against a timeline of 12 years. We are 2 years into the entire movement. And we have if we really want the 2.42 billion trees to be planted, we need to be doing it over a piece of 13,700 kilometers of land, especially and dedicatedly on farmers' land. Why would a farmer do that? Will be a question. Why would a farmer want to move away from the staple crop of rice, wheat, or anything else he's growing through which he can actually get a year-on-year income, season-on-season income? The idea is we are promoting trees as insurance or investment. Next slide, please. When a farmer plants trees on his land, let's say right now as a nation, we are importing around 100,000 crores rupees worth of timber from across many other nations, Indonesia, Burma, Vietnam, and a lot of African teak for that matter. Whereas we, being a tropical nation, our wood is as good in quality or sometimes even superior given the diverse weather conditions through which the wood goes through. We can grow our own trees and we need not have to export it. That actually opens up a huge market from which farmers can leverage. Second thing, if you have a tree on the land and if it so happens that the market this year is not suitable, you can hold on to your tree, unlike your rice or fruits or any other perishable commodities, and sell it during the time when you find the market price suitable. Thus, and whatever I'm showing you here as 3 to 8 times of income improvement, it's not theoretical. Can you please go to the next slide? It's coming from an experience of working in Tamil Nadu with over 1 lakh plus farmers from the year of 2005. We have been working with over 1 lakh farmers with small, medium, marginal, large land holdings and bringing trees on their land, and also having witnessed economic benefits and having developed various models for various land types, various rainwater patterns, and also soil types. And based on this experience, we are taking this to over 4.2 million farmers. Next slide, please. So how are we intending to do? Like I have elaborately, justified how the means is really, what must I say, legitimate, how everybody is having a win-win solution. How are we intending to do that? We are working.
One more minute, Praveen.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
we are working with the governments. Governments are the biggest, custodians who can actually work with the larger populations. So we are working with the two state governments of the southern India. We have actually set up a large IT infrastructure through which we can handhold farmers through the entire cycle of from the time he picks up the saplings until the time of harvest. He will be handheld. We have people in the communities who will be our last mile extension workers who will be supporting the farmers. And this app and this entire platform is also being leveraged by the government to facilitate transition by providing the incentives that the government of India provides through its livelihood program scheme, the National Rural Employment Scheme, and also state schemes which promote tree-based farming. So we have just begun this journey with Cauvery Calling in the two states. When I say begun, I mean to say working with the 4.2 million farmers. We have an experience of 15 years, and at this point in time, we are working across both the states, across various districts. This river flows through, and we would like to be sharing with everyone who's here year on year how this is progressing, what are the processes that we follow which is enabling us to do it across the entire river basin so that it can be adopted across various other tropical rivers in the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very exciting presentation. And what I particularly value is that it's also very ambitious as it needs to balance two approaches. One is on the water side, ensuring that the river gets more water basically at the end of the exercise. And on the other hand, you have to work closely with the farmers because the farmers are the one who take the decisions regarding the land use. So far, I have not seen any questions popping up for you, Praveena.
I can see one from Ino. Yeah, I can see one from Ino. What alternative livelihood are we giving farmers as they wait for trees to mature? So the idea is to not bring the entire piece of land a farmer grows under trees. We intend to have only part of the land come under trees. And the modeling of trees or the species varieties which we offer are native in nature. And secondly, they are short-term, long-term. You have softwood trees and hardwood trees. Some trees grow very quickly, right? When these trees grow quickly, there are shade-loving crops which can be grown in the shade that the tree covers, piece of the land that the tree covers. And the second thing is you can actually have creepers like here, peppers and vanillas that grow on year on these 3-year-old trees and still provide annual income from the trees. So the idea is to not really move the entire piece of land under trees, but to have a portion of it. And to give an example, to answer it a little further, let's say a person actually puts trees on 10% of the land. On a year-on-year basis, a farmer earns around 40,000 rupees from 2 rice crops. Yeah. So he will be losing around 4,000 rupees year-on-year due to the 10% of land lost from trees. By the 10th year, the trees that he has put on his boundaries, let's say on an acre of land, you can have up to 160 trees, right? So a tree, one single tree, either soft or hardwood, 10-year-old tree, can fetch him up to 10,000 rupees. So over 10 years, a farmer would have lost around 40,000 rupees, whereas he would have reaped 10,000 into 160 rupees worth of income growing on his land. So when you share these economics, and especially when this economics is shared by a farmer to farmers, farmers are convinced. Like if I go and talk, nobody's going to listen to me. If a farmer speaks, the farmer listens because he knows the man who's speaking, his livelihood at stake. So we are also having various ways of communicating with farmers so that we are authentic, we are sincere, and there is a certain integrity to whatever we are communicating.
Thank you very much, Praveena. Actually, you already partially answered another question from Diego Pineda. Which species of trees are cultivated in the case of the Cauvery Basin?
So in the case of Cauvery Basin, we, from our experience of working 15 years in this region, we have around 15 varieties of native timber trees which are grown well on this part of the land, which have very high value when grown. Like it can be teak, it can be sandalwood, it can be red sandal, it can be mahogany, it can be it can be many other such varieties which are very local but have very high value, timber value. So those are the trees that we are promoting. Along with it, we are also going with some trees which are both horticulture and timber values, like jackfruit, like your different gooseberries, and those sorts.
Thank you very much indeed. We have to move on to our next speaker. I noted that 2 questions to Mr. Mishra have not been raised. They came in a bit late. But what we will propose is that we will submit them to Mr. Mishra, and perhaps he can be so kind to give an answer in writing.
Sure.
And let me thank you very much. I see you nodding. That's very kind of you. Let's now move to the third and last speaker of this session. And now we move also to the other side of the world, to South Africa, with a presentation by Kalpana Maraj from the Future Water Institute in the Cape Town University, and where research has been done on a mechanism to manage polluted urban runoff under low-cost conditions with a purpose to protect wetlands and rivers. Kalpana, the floor is yours. 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. Today I will be presenting on assessing the suitability of constructed wetlands to treat surface waters affected by informal settlements in developing countries, and we will specifically be looking at a South African context. Next slide, please. Okay, next. Okay, thank you. Approximately 4 million people reside in informal settlements in South Africa, and this number is growing every day. There is a lack of formal drainage and sanitation systems in these settlements, and this results in catchment degradation. So elevated nutrient levels, increased E. coli concentrations, and contaminants of emerging concern are all characteristics of rivers affected by informal settlements. We will be focusing on addressing elevated nutrient levels in river systems. Next slide, please. So a decentralized, non-invasive, and easy to maintain surface water rehabilitation system is necessary in this kind of context. Constructed wetlands were chosen as a treatment method as they are a well-known remediation measure that is cost-effective, scalable, and easy to maintain. The aim of this project was to determine whether constructed wetlands are suitable to treat polluted runoff from informal settlements, with a particular focus on the ability of constructed wetlands to reduce nutrient concentrations in contaminated water. Next slide. So a case study was done on the Stibule River catchment, which is located in the Western Cape province of South Africa near the town of Franschhoek. So this is a peri-urban area with a lot of tourism and wineries and agriculture in the area. And the Stibule River is a perennial river, and the water quality of the river is monitored through the Water Hub, which is a water research facility, and the location of the Water Hub can be seen on the map. And previous slide. An informal settlement called Langrich is situated on the upper banks of the Stibule River. It's home to over 8,000 residents, most of whom are seasonal workers on the farms in the area. The photo on the upper right-hand side of the slide shows Langrich informal settlement. And on the bottom right of the slide, you can see the condition of the Stibule River, and it looks like this throughout the year. Next slide, please. The nutrient concentrations in the Stibule River, as in many rivers affected by informal settlements, are highly variable. You can see in the box and whisker plot that the ammonia concentrations in the river vary between 3.2 and 34.4 milligrams per liter, while we see lower nitrate and orthophosphate concentrations. these sort of elevated nutrient concentrations and highly variable nutrient concentrations pose a challenge to achieving consistent nutrient reduction in the system. Several large-scale constructed wetland cells were constructed at the water hub used to treat the polluted river. These are the constructed wetland cells at the water hub. There are 6 cells in total, with each cell being 16 meters wide, long, 3.5 meters wide, and 70 centimeters deep. The system is batch operated, with water from the Stibule River being diverted into each cell and held in the system for 3 to 5 days. A significant nutrient reduction has been observed in the constructed wetland cells at the water hub, but studies on the physical and biological processes occurring within these cells are difficult to determine due to the sheer size of the system. A lab system was therefore constructed to carry out further detailed experiments in a controlled environment. Next slide, please. The lab system that was designed was based on the non-vegetated stone constructed wetland cells at the water hub. The length and width was scaled down by a factor of 8 from the constructed wetland cells at the water hub, while the depth remained the same. The available volume of the system is 215 liters, and the system can be operated as a batch system or a continuous flow system. Next slide, please. The lab system that I just showed you was colonized using biofilm that we collected from the constructed wetland cells at the water hub. The image on the slide is a micrograph of a cell suspension that was prepared from the biofilm that we collected from the lab system. This microbial community here within the biofilm is responsible for the nutrient uptake and other biological activity that occurs within a constructed wetland, and it is of major significance in the biofiltration process. Next slide, please. Biofiltration is the process that removes biodegradable compounds from contaminated water through biodegradation, filtering of suspended solids, and adsorption of micropollutants. The nutrient removal mechanisms in the biofiltration process are either physical or biological. Phosphorus removal occurs through physical adsorptive processes, while nitrogen removal occurs through biological processes occurring in the biofilm. Next slide, please. The main biological activity expected in a system such as this are nitrification and denitrification. Nitrification requires aerobic conditions and involves the oxidation of ammonia to nitrate, with nitrite being formed as an intermediary. Denitrification requires anaerobic conditions and is the process that occurs when nitrate is reduced to atmospheric nitrogen. Next slide. So a series of nutrient degradation experiments on the lab system was useful in determining the extent of nutrient degradation that is possible within a constructed wetland system. 200 liters of water from the Stibule River was brought into the lab and circulated through the system for 10 days, and the system was continuously running. Water samples were taken every 6 hours, and the nutrient levels in these water samples were analyzed and used to produce the graphs and results that I will show you in the next few slides. There were 6 experiments in total. 3 were carried out at a flow rate of 0.5 liters per minute, and the other 3 were carried out at 1.5 liters per minute. Next. Okay. The table shown here is a summary of the results that were achieved during the 6 nutrient degradation experiments. In the first row, you can see the varying inlet nutrient concentrations that were observed during each run. And as you can see, over each run, the nutrient concentrations were highly variable. Run C at 1.5 liters per minute is an outlier in terms of ammonia and orthophosphate reduction achieved. Next. It can be seen that the greatest ammonia and orthophosphate removal occurred during run A at 1.5 liters per minute, with a reduction of 91.8% and 88.3% respectively. Next. I would like to draw your attention to the percentage denitrified row, as I'll be diving into further into the nitrification and denitrification processes. So you'll see that there are very low levels of denitrification observed, and this proves that there was little success in achieving anaerobic zones in the lab system. And as I mentioned earlier, anaerobic conditions are required for denitrification. We can learn more about the processes occurring in the system by looking at some graphs. I will now be focusing on the degradation of ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Okay. This graph shows the results from one of the nutrient degradation studies that was carried out at a flow rate of 1.5 liters per minute. Similar graphs were produced for all 6 of the nutrient degradation studies. We can see that the initial ammonia concentration is 14.5 milligrams per liter, and this decreases all the way down to approximately 1 milligrams per liter at 228 hours. The nitrate concentration initially decreases between 0 hours and 24 hours, and then begins to gradually increase up to approximately 5.2 milligrams per liter at 156 hours. This is then followed by a decrease in concentration in nitrate. The nitrite concentration remains well below 1 milligrams per liter. Not much about exactly what processes are occurring can be determined from this graph. We can definitely tell that ammonia is being degraded, nitrate is being formed for a period and then consumed for a period. The nitrite concentration remains low as it is unstable and oxidizes rapidly to form nitrate. Next. These graphs showing total nitrogen concentration tell us more about exactly what biological processes are occurring in the system. The graph on the left shows all the studies that were carried out at 0.5 liters per minute, and the graph on the right shows those that were carried out at 1.5 liters per minute. For the studies at 0.5 liters a minute, we can see that there is an initial decrease in total nitrogen concentration for all of the experiments that were carried out from 0 hours to 72 hours. And then the nitrogen level plateaus between 72 hours and 168 hours. This is followed by another decrease in total nitrogen concentration from 168 hours to 228 hours. If you look at the runs at 1.5 liters per minute, you'll see a similar, although less distinct trend, with an initial decrease in concentration from 0 hours to 60 hours, and a second major drop in concentration happening from 144 hours to 228 hours. By comparing this graph with the graph in the previous slide for each run, it is possible to determine which biological process is dominant during which period. Nitrification is dominant in the beginning of the 228-hour period, but gives way to denitrification being dominant during the latter part of the 228-hour period.
One more minute, Kalpana.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
from these results, we can see that it is evident that the lab-constructed wetland system did not achieve a consistent extent of nutrient uptake in each nutrient degradation study. But it is evident that the biological processes such as nitrification and denitrification that were occurring were consistent. Further studies on the effects on retention time and dissolved oxygen concentrations on constructed wetland performance could yield greater nutrient degradation efficiencies, with the treated runoff being potentially fit to reuse for other purposes such as agriculture, as we are testing out at the water hub, where the treated water from the constructed wetland cells are used to irrigate a permaculture garden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalpana. So it's a very insightful presentation. It's quite different from the earlier speakers, of course, but at the same time, very much about how to make use of nature-based or semi-arranged constructions to make optimal use of microbes and ecosystems to reduce pollution. I have not seen any questions pop up on your presentation. Maybe Pepijn will still find one, so we will see that. But I wanted to ask you a very operational question, and that is that the microbiology in such a constructed wetland is very interesting. It's great. It's useful. But how do you deal with that other headache, which is the clogging because of silt that comes into the pores of the wetland, but also, of course, biomass grows on the pollution. It expands. And how do you manage the clogging problem? Did you experience that?
So I didn't actually experience this. So this whole thing was sort of done over, we had a 35-day biological acclimation period where the biofilm grew, and we tracked the growth. And then we carried out experiments over the period of 2 or 3 months. So it didn't actually get the chance to clog. And then with the larger constructed wetland cells at the water hub, those cells are actually quite large, and what we experience is pockets of biofilm growth. So it won't grow everywhere, and it's all sort of concentrated at the bottom. So it attaches to the sediment. The silt that actually settles at the bottom of the cells is where you'll get the biofilm formation, and we don't actually see any biofilm at the top, which is very interesting, and it's something that needs to be sort of looked at further. And we need to look at how can we sort of achieve consistent biofilm growth throughout the system. So the issue of clogging hasn't come up, also because of the size of our media, which is quite large. Like our filtration media is like anywhere between 9 millimeters and 25 millimeters. So we're not looking at like the micron level or like sort of below 5 millimeters. So it doesn't really get a chance to clog.
All right, thank you. We did get a question from Eustathios Faridis. And actually, it combines also with another question that I have, and that is, I mean, from my perspective, I would say, why would you, if you want to recycle that water into agriculture, why would you take out nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, right? So why not keep, and it links up with the questions of Mr. Faridis, and it is, do you consider the role, the impact of nitrogenous gases, emissions, which are greenhouse gases, from the nitrification, denitrification processes in your wetland?
Okay, good question. So this study has sort of like morphed and evolved as we went along. So initially we were looking at sort of domestic water use standards in South Africa, because sort of the residents of the informal settlements use the river for domestic purposes. So we thought, how can we sort of put a system in place where we can treat this water for them and they can use it for domestic purposes? Because in Langereath, there's only sort of one tap for every 70 residents. So water access is a big thing, which they don't have access to water for domestic purposes unless they're using the river water, which has already been contaminated by them. So when we started, we were looking at getting sort of ammonia and phosphorus levels down to sort of a domestic standard. But this evolved because a permaculture garden was put in at the water hub, and then the water started being used for that. So yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of everything if you were using it for irrigation, because that's actually good as a fertilizer. And then evaluating the N2O emissions from the constructed wetlands, that's something we didn't actually get to, but we're not sure whether the denitrified sort of nitrogen takes the form of N2O or atmospheric nitrogen. It's something that still needs to be measured.
Right, yes. And then actually it also highlights the trade-off between, on one hand, you have to treat your wastewater, reduce the pollution. On the other hand, it may also indeed lead to greenhouse emissions. Somewhere there must be a balance or an optimum between those two objectives. That's work in progress, I understand. I don't know, Pepijn, if we can still get Mr. Mishra back. I don't see him on my screen, because we could then ask the last two questions on the Ganga program. Or Sana, do you know if that's possible? If not, then I will close the session. Thank you very much to our three eminent speakers. Very happy and very glad that you were able and willing to be with us here in this session. And also thank you to the audience. for the questions and also for what they will take from this session. From my perspective, I would say that the three presentations have emphasized how we have to move forward in working with water across different sectors. So at the end of the day, of course, we deal with water, but we have to be very much better with respect to spatial planning and urban planning in order to meet the ultimate goals, that talk about resilience and access to water and jobs, etc. And at the same time, also using notably nature to achieve at least part of these goals. Nature in the sense of ecosystems, but also the capabilities of the microbial ecosystems in wetlands or in constructed wetlands. So there is quite a lot of scope to maximize the value of these natural systems as a means to reach these sustainable development goals. Thank you very much again, and hope to meet you again in the next sessions. Take care.